my colleague, Dr. Paul Fisher, who should be connected to this call and I think will participate in the Q&A that we have at the end of this presentation. A lot of the work that I'll be doing has been conducted by students and staff in our programs. And most of the research that I'll be showing was conducted by my former graduate student, Elisa Solis, who is now taking a vacation and should be coming back in the fall for a PhD to continue working with us. So again, my area of expertise is what we call controlled environment agriculture. And perhaps some of you have heard about this term. It's becoming very popular, particularly for the application that I'll show in the next slide. But when we think about controlled environments, what comes to mind is just high-tech plant production in facilities like greenhouses with the use of electric lamps, for example. And this is an aerial view of the sea of greenhouses that we see in the Netherlands. And you see different colored greenhouses. That's because nowadays growers are using LEDs, and we're using LEDs in our homes as well. Part of the reason is because they consume less energy, or they're more energy efficient than the typical lamps that used to be used by the industry, which are those orange lights that we see in the rest of the greenhouses. Now, part of the reason why controlled environments is becoming popular today is because of indoor farms. And I see Dr. Paul Fisher joined the call. So again, Paul, whenever you want to come in and say something about what I'll be presenting, by all means, please feel free to do so. So vertical farms, plant factories, indoor farms are becoming very popular because they can connect urban food systems to consumers. And I'll show in the next slide some of those benefits and some of the motivation or the push for indoor farming. But as you can see, they're very capital intensive because of the type of systems that we have to use, the amount of electricity that goes into producing this plants indoors commercially. This picture on the corner it's actually a vertical farm in Orlando from a company called Calera. They have now several vertical farms. This was one of the first projects, and this is in conjunction with the Marriott hotel chain. And essentially they've built this very visual plant factory in the patio of the hotel, and they're using it more of as a marketing strategy to attract people to do events as the hotel, as opposed to using this as a productive facility. Whatever they do produce, they sell to the restaurant and to the kitchen in the restaurant, and it is consumed by people at the hotel. So this is a good use to vertical farming integrated into urban food systems, for example. So I found this yesterday. This was put out by this company. And it just shows some of the selling points that commercial users of vertical farming use, let's say, to sell the benefits. One of them is, and it's typically the most common benefit that's commonly used, is that you don't have to ship plants, and this is typically used for vegetables or for herbs, and they don't typically have to travel for very long distances. You can essentially harvest something and within the same day be at even at the consumer table. They're also more resource use efficient, so in general, water, fertilizer, other resources for producing plant are more efficiently used in these systems. Another advantage is that you can reduce the use of pesticides, but you can also improve some nutritional quality aspects of plants, which is also very attractive to a lot of consumers. Now, where does indoor home gardening fit with all of this? Well, it's another form of growing plants indoors in our houses, or in perhaps in restaurants or in classrooms. We're growing these plants in environments that are not necessarily adapted to plant production. So for example, the intensities of light that we have at home are nowhere near the intensities that you'd have in a commercial plant factory or indoor farm like I showed, but still it's a way to produce plants indoors, and people pursue this more of as a hobby as opposed to actually growing plants for commercial production, of course. And there's different systems that are available for this purposes, commercial systems that perhaps some of you have used or have at home, like the AeroGarden that's put out by Miracle Grow Scots. Even IKEA, the furniture company, has a Vaxxer system, it's called, where you have this small hydroponic system. This comes with the LED lights, and they'll sell you the seeds and the fertilizer and whatever else you need to be able to grow, again, typically leafy greens or herbs. And then there's newer systems. This is the 12 system. It's also made by Scott's, and they are selling this as a way to enable consumers to grow plants for 12 months of the year, and that's why it's called 12. And we've got a few of those for some of the research we're doing, and it's just a much larger system, but it has a very nice design to put in a living room, for example. So there's also systems that are built by consumers, a lot of people that are very handy. You can see this picture. It's a very nice system that was built by someone who has a lot of capabilities to construct things. I would never be able to do something like that. But then you have other things, and I like this picture I found yesterday, where someone just put this system within the room, and you see that it's covered, it's enclosed where the light and the plants would be, just because there'll be a lot of light that's needed to grow these plants that you essentially don't want to have illuminating the entire room. I also like this picture on the bottom, on the center bottom, with corn. It just goes to show what type of plants people are interested in growing indoors. And corn and tomatoes are plants that require a lot of light. So it's just very interesting to see how, yes, these plants are next to a windowsill, but they most likely will require some sort of supplemental lighting within that indoor environment for them to actually be productive. And we can see a tomato in a very simple hydroponic system next to a windowsill. So that's a good strategy to provide good lighting to plants, but at times that's not enough for a plant to be productive. So what is the challenge? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the research that's conducted in controlled environments has been conducted for commercial growers to serve the needs of commercial growers. Greenhouse growers, nowadays, there's a lot of research coming out for the vertical farming or the indoor farming industry. And there's challenges that indoor home gardeners have that cannot necessarily be addressed with the research that's coming out for commercial growers. And I just found some posts yesterday online about the questions that people typically have or the problems. See, we have different herbs that were growing in one of these AeroGarden systems that all of a sudden just died. And so a consumer would go to these online communities and ask for help about what happened. I found this picture about the bell pepper plants very funny, because it just goes to show how a lot of the people who are involved in these indoor gardening activities don't even know what a pepper plant looks like. And this is someone, you get this system shipped to you and they're telling you you're going to get a pepper plant, and by mistake perhaps this person received a lettuce plant which looks nothing like peppers. So again, there's a lot of information that still needs to be provided to educate people who are interested in these activities. Root zone pruning, that's another thing that's of interest, just because within this very small hydroponic systems, when you have a lot of plants, it's very easy for those systems to be filled with roots, and that will entail that someone will have to fill in those reservoirs more frequently, which involves a lot more effort, or there's a lot of risk for a consumer to fail when something like this happens. And then there's also problems physiological problems that can occur within these indoor systems. This is a very common, the picture on this on the corner, it shows lettuce tip burn, which is a very common problem with lettuce plants grown indoors. And so we need to figure out a way to help home gardeners understand how to minimize the challenges that they may encounter when they're trying to work with indoor gardening or to pursue indoor gardening. But we also have to understand the motivations and understand how the motivation for indoor gardeners are very different than those for commercial growers. And I'll have a slide with more specifics. I'll show that in the next few minutes. But just again, these are posts that I've gathered over the last few months from social media, and you can see that the people get excited with just harvesting something and putting it in a wrap and eating your own lettuce. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of produce, but something that gives that satisfaction to consumers. And then I found this post that talks about someone suffering from depression and how the use of indoor gardening activities has also helped overcome some of those issues. And again, it just goes to show too the power that pursuing these activities has. Now, I mean, I'm sure we've all and everyone in this call, I'm sure, is very interested in gardening, but I really like the title on this post. It just calls the silver lining of this coronavirus era is really the rebirth of urban agriculture, because we're all enclosed in our houses and we're trying to pursue activities, and gardening is one of those activities that give a lot of satisfaction. There's also the fact that people perhaps don't want to go out as much, and they choose to try to grow some of the things at home that they otherwise have to go out to the supermarket and get. So right now, it's really a good time for us. We're really enjoying a lot of the research that we're doing, and it relates to what pretty much everyone in the world is experiencing with this social distancing caused by the pandemic. And so here's just very quickly results from a study that we found a couple of days ago from Princeton, and it was looking at the value essentially of home gardening activities. And what they found is that people who pursue home gardening have the same level, they even relate this to happiness as those who pursue biking, which we see a lot of these days, or walking out, or just going out and having fun. And in particular, vegetable gardening as opposed to ornamental gardening has those positive effects. So again, going back to those challenges and the differences that we have with commercial production versus home gardening activities, a lot of the research out there is looking at maximizing profits, reducing inputs, and increasing yield for commercial producers. And there's a significant lack of information on what are the requirements to grow plants in these non-commercial spaces for small hydroponics. Lighting requirements, how little light do these plants actually need to give us that harvestable yield that we're after as a home gardener. Plant maintenance, how easy can we really make these systems for people who really don't know much about growing plants, fertilizer management, and then plant selection. I mean, you can see those two pictures with the tomatoes and see how different the genetics of those plants are. A tomato grown in a greenhouse versus something that would be grown indoors in one of these countertop systems. So now I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the research we've done in the past 2-3 years working in this field. One of the studies we conducted last year was just trying to identify those knowledge gaps among people interested in indoor gardening and asking questions online. So Reddit is it's a social media platform where people ask questions and others respond to those questions. And sometimes there could be misinformation within the responses that are given to the questions that are being asked, because those who post in these threads may not necessarily have a horticultural background or may not necessarily have the right answers to growing plants indoors. So for this study, we had 4 different communities, let's call them, within this Reddit platform, all heavily focused on hydroponic production indoors. And what we found is that essentially most of the questions that are asked within these communities relate to 3 main topics. One is, what type of production system should we use? What type of hydroponics? Where do we put these systems? Another important topic that's being discussed is plant lighting. What type of LEDs do I purchase? What color of LEDs? How much light do these plants need? And then root zone environment, which relates to the fertilization, but also to management of the solution, to balancing pH and fertilizer, and temperature of the solution as well. And you'd see we measured other or used other topics that were of less not conflict, but people just ask less questions about those. So we focus specifically on those topics, and some of the research we've done so far actually tries to address a lot of those questions. So we've done studies trying to identify those minimum light requirements to grow these plants indoors. And I want you to focus your attention on these 2 pictures. We see lettuce being grown in a commercial greenhouse with high pressure sodium lamps that are giving, I included the value there, 10 to 12 moles. That's a unit of light that we use for plants. And DLI, it's an acronym that refers to daily light integral, which is essentially the amount of light within a day that these plants need for optimal production, let's say. So within a greenhouse, this is what it looks like, the amount of electricity that goes into having these lamps on to get the maximum production. But then you see the picture on the bottom. This is the IKEA Vaxxer that I showed earlier. It has a strip of LEDs and a few plants, and that's never going to provide nowhere near the intensity or the amount of light that a commercial grower would target. So we're trying to understand, well, how little light do these plants actually need? Again, to satisfy a home gardener, which doesn't necessarily require the large yields that a commercial grower would use. And another thing to keep in mind is that there's been studies that have shown that within your home environment, less than 1 mole of light, and it's really closer to 0.5 moles of light, is really what's enough or what we should use for our own comfort. So again, when we're trying to supply or grow plants under what's optimum, it just would become very uncomfortable for this indoor gardening activities. So one of the studies we conducted was looking at different very low DLIs, again, daily light integral, in indoor environments. All of these values are significantly lower than what we typically use for commercial production. And what we found is that between 6.5 to 9.7 moles of light per day should be enough for a consumer to harvest a high quality lettuce with, I mean, we measured some of the nutritional compounds within the lettuce and found that they're acceptable, or they should be acceptable for consumers. We did a similar study with basil. One of the differences that we moved the plants to higher amounts of light in biweekly intervals. And again, we found the same thing. In general, we found that the more light you give to this type of plants, the higher yield you'd get, which is something we expected. But the values, the amounts of light that we're giving are much lower than what you'd find in any scientific report. And we found that 10 moles of light should be enough for someone to continuously harvest basil plants within an indoor environment for home gardening activities. So some other research that we've conducted, again, is looking at how to make nutrient solution management easier. A lot of the people who pursue hydroponic gardening do it because of 2 reasons. One, just gardening outdoors requires a lot of weeding, and that's not something people typically enjoy. And then another is there's a lot of risk at overwatering plants or not watering plants enough. And so with hydroponics, in theory, you don't have that risk. I mean, it's not necessarily easier, but it's just attractive to a lot of people who pursue gardening activities. So what happens with a lot of the hydroponic systems that are commonly used for this activities is that you'd have to replace the nutrient solution every so often. It's typically recommended to replace and essentially just dump what's in the reservoir every 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And then that requires a lot of effort. Again, you'd have to take the system out, remove the plants, dump it, and it's just not easy. So one of the studies that we did was just trying to understand, well, how little or what's the lowest frequency that we can use to maintain plants alive without actually having to replace or dump that nutrient solution, just adding fertilizer. Then this pictures just highlight the different types of level of involvement that people can have. I mean, this is again taken from social media where someone's saying, these are the different formulations of fertilizer that I'm going to use to grow plants. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have commercial products that are already ready for you to dump in your hydroponic system, mix them, and easy. So there's different ways to approach this. And for this trial that we did, essentially growing plants with a regular solution replacement every 2 weeks or without, that's what this acronyms mean. We found that there's no difference when you're growing something like basil. Essentially, a home gardener should be able to grow these plants without even having to replace the solution, just refilling the reservoir whenever water levels become low, and then adding fertilizer in the recommended intervals, which is a good thing. It reduces the effort to grow these plants. We did somewhat of a similar experiment with tomatoes, and for this particular type of tomato that we grew, we did find negative effects from not replacing that solution as frequently. Essentially, our yields were a lot lower, and that is because the salts just accumulate. The fertilizer accumulates within the reservoir, and it just negatively affects the growth and then the productivity of plants. And then you also run the risk of encountering physiological disorders like blossom end rot, which is very common. It's a nutritional imbalance that affects tomato fruit. So for this type of tomato, beefsteak tomatoes, those large tomatoes, this strategy might not necessarily work as well as it does for leafy greens. So a few of the things that we're currently doing, and this was before we were shut down due to the pandemic, is we're trying to identify what cultivars, because a lot of new cultivars are coming out. If you have the opportunity to go to Lowe's, you'd see all different kinds of tomatoes and or peppers or other types of vegetables that are coming out to be used for this home gardening market that are compact. So we're trying to identify compact plants that could be used for either patio gardening, for indoor gardening, that are productive, that are early yielding, and just try to identify what type of plant material we'd have to use to continue working with fruiting vegetables, because most of the work we've done so far has been with leafy greens and herbs. And then this picture with this tomato plant, fully loaded tomato plant, is just something I found yesterday. Again, just to show that the research be supporting urban agriculture is not only on the production side of things. This is someone who works with plant genetics and trying to improve varieties, and they're developing this compact plant that's high yielding, that could be used for this market, because we'd like to get as many fruit as possible for the effort we're putting into growing these plants in our houses. And so this is just to show you the different type of growth that you'd get in a greenhouse or in a patio versus an indoor setup. And then the two pictures here are trying to show something that's called intumescence. It's just a physiological disorder that we unfortunately see a lot with both tomatoes and peppers. And it's thought to be caused by a lack of UV radiation within the systems, and that's because it didn't used to be a problem because we used to rely on fluorescent lamps within our home environments. And now that everyone's switching to LEDs, well, LEDs lack that little bit of UV light that you need to prevent those disorders from occurring. And so if a home consumer, if a home grower gets to see this, they might feel discouraged to continue to pursue these activities, or they might think that it's something they're doing, which is not. It's just related to the environment that these plants are growing. So we're going to soon start experiments looking at ways to minimize those problems. That's all I have for now. Let's just see if there are any questions, or if Dr. Fisher has any comments.
Just that we love doing this research work and look forward to getting some feedback from you. So please fire ahead.
All right, folks, if you got any questions, you can disable your video or your microphones, and we'll keep a look here on the Zoom group chat too, and we'll try and pass the questions as they show up.
I see like people were commenting on the pink vertical farm in one of the pictures, and yes, that is at the Marriott World Center in Orlando, and it's a very nice facility. And that company, Celina, has already opened one of, I think it's the largest plant factory in the southeastern U.S. and is planning on expanding in Atlanta and other cities. So that concept of working with the hospitality industry has worked very well for them.
My daughter is the restaurant manager there that uses those greens. It's wonderful.
Nice.
I wonder if any of our participants today are trying to grow hydroponically or growing indoors, and maybe you could share your experiences there.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah, you got any questions? I know we were talking about light, like, you know, with the hydroponics seminar that we did.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you guys for joining us today. I wanted to pop in, and I have a question about the economics of some of these systems. You showed a lot of the stuff like the IKEA systems. Has there been any work done looking at like the cost for the output? I know a lot of folks that just want to grow their own food, sometimes cost is not a huge factor if that's your goal, but inevitably in the long term, that'll be more and more important. Do you know of any work on that stuff?
I'll let Paul answer that question because I know he's looked into it. He had a full living room of hydroponic systems this past few weeks, so he was interested in that.
Yeah, and admittedly, I apologize for being 3 or 4 minutes late this morning, but we've been living with 8 hydroponic systems in my living room, and I had a student coming in that's taking them back to campus today. And so the bottom line, Hannah, is that if you look at this in terms of indoor growing in a hydroponic system, then it is not a way of growing cheap produce. And I'm just looking here at with the particular systems that we were using, which happened to be 12 systems, is what they're called from Scott's Miracle Grow. No endorsement there, but that, you know, they've worked very well. It works out per pound of tomatoes around $3 in electricity cost, okay, and to grow the plants in that system. So just on electricity alone, to run the LED light and a little bit on the pump, then it's expensive. So you know, one of the things is when we think about indoor growing, the structure itself and the lights are significant costs. So one of those systems costs around $300. Now, when we were doing some of the research work on campus with leafy greens are great because they're nowhere near as sensitive. They're a lot faster. In 4 weeks, you can get a really good harvest. And we looked at both sophisticated LEDs, grow lamps, red and blue and white LEDs. And then we also went into hardware stores and bought off-the-shelf fluorescent and white LED lights, kind of shop lights. And those shop lights worked perfectly well for growing leafy greens. They're not going to be quite so successful with fruiting crops because of some of the problems that Celina was talking about, such as intumescence. But you can have a much cheaper do-it-yourself system, get those moles per square meter per day that Celina was talking about. And so for around $40 to $50 with a couple of shop lights, and especially if you're growing in containers or you've just got a bucket with an air stone in them for hydroponics, you can get yourself set up. And but when we're talking about really saving money on purchasing, on growing our own produce versus purchasing it, then sunlight is a wonderful thing, and we don't have to pay for it. So really, we want to be thinking about growing outdoors in our patio or in the soil.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Excellent.
Yes, and keep asking questions, because I'm seeing, and you'd notice that the questions I'm reading right now are related to lighting, which is in agreement with what we found in the study I mentioned. There's a lot of question about what type of lamp should we use or what type of color should we use, and that's why I went back to this slide. And again, going back to the problem with intumescence. So with the different colors, you can get different growth patterns, and indoors you essentially want to have a compact plant, and so the higher blue or the higher Kelvin you can have, the more compact your plant should be. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're after. There may also be impacts in flowering of this plant. So there's several different things to consider, but as a general response, you'd probably want something blue biased or a higher Kelvin value for indoor gardening. But then again, those LEDs, as Dr. Fisher just mentioned, if you go to Lowe's and you get an LED, well, that may not necessarily have what you need to inhibit or minimize problems like what we see on this slide.
And one of the questions there was the spectral quality of LEDs. When we did trials with leafy greens, with red leaf lettuce was our kind of test crop, then we used 4,000 up to 6,500 Kelvin values with fluorescence and white LEDs. So these are all white lights. If it's got a little bit of a cooler spectrum to it, a bit more blue in it, it does tend to bring out the pigment color, so your reds will be stronger reds, for example, sometimes a bit more compact, but all of those lights will work for leafy greens. And there's another question in here about, do we need LED lights that are, have got a full spectrum similar to sunlight? What do you think there, Celina?
I think white light should be enough, as you just mentioned. Any off-the-shelf white LED should really be enough. Sunlight has essentially all different colors, and so does white light from these lamp sources. Perhaps they lack UV light, for example, if you're getting an LED, but if your plant's not susceptible to disorders from that lack of UV, then it should totally be fine. And I'm assuming when they say sunlight, they're referring to yellow biased color.
Yeah, and so one of the things we don't have to do is we do not have to grow plants with purple light, which some of the original grow lamps came out with just blue and red LEDs, and You might want to have a purple beacon in the corner of your kitchen, but you really don't need to do that.
Right. So it works. Just to clarify, you can have it. It will work, but it's absolutely not necessary. I see a question about asking if the plants grow out of the systems. And that's, again, one of the things I'm interested in is in the level of pruning that you have to perform to keep these plants within the systems, and that being root pruning or shoot pruning. Because my first thought is you probably don't want to prune your tomatoes, because then you're taking away potential shoots where you'd get fruit. But there's only so much space that these plants can grow into within the system. So again, that's part of the reason why it's important to find cultivars that are compact enough that will grow well within the limited space that you have pursuing home gardening, whatever system you'd want to use. I do see a lot of pruning on this social media platforms, people just showing what they've done. I don't think there's any science behind that, and I don't think we can answer any questions on whether it should be done or if it helps. With root zone pruning, for example, there's potential for you to essentially, as you're stressing the plant, you're making it produce some nutritional or quality compounds that would improve things like flavor, for example. But I think there's a lot of questions still to be answered about what type of pruning should or could be done with these plants.
A couple of other quick comments about that is that we're looking specifically at what kind of variety and what kind of stage of that plant would be ideal for a plant product for you to be able to go and purchase and put into your indoor system. And if you can start with a tomato plant that has got flowers on it or small fruit, then that's a lot quicker. If you're starting from seed indoors all the way through to harvest, it could take you 12 to 14 weeks, which is an awful lot of time for things to go wrong. When it comes to tomatoes as well, we have our little artificial buzzy bee that we're out there pollinating the flowers indoors, because we don't have pollinators, hopefully, buzzing around our living room. And so that's a factor as well. There was a question about commercial hydroponic systems and what kind of scale it is. Well, the largest, by far the majority of production is in places like Leamington and Canada, now into the Midwest, Arizona, and the United States. These are large and very automated greenhouse operations. So there's big economies of scale here. So many of those operations are going to be 5 acres plus in terms of size. There are also a lot of small mom and pop type greenhouse operations that are totally at the other end of the scale. And many of those are the ones which are doing things like aquaponics and combining vegetables with crops like fish. There's also a really interesting question there about the future of vertical farming. And this is it's a very interesting area in horticulture right now. There's a lot of interesting business plans of growing completely the plants without any sunlight and shelves indoors. There's a lot of investor funding that's going into it, but it's not easy because the cost of production is so much higher in terms of the structure and also the electrical cost to run it. So what do you think, Celina, in terms of, is this the future? Is this going to feed the world?
No, I don't think so. But there are applications, and that's a completely different program of research that we have where these systems, these plant factories or vertical farms can be used to solve problems that commercial growers have. And these are growers who are producing plants in greenhouses, but are struggling with different stages. For example, the propagation stage of this plant, and using these systems to improve those propagation processes has a lot of potential, I believe.
Yeah, so Celina's got a graduate student who's working on cuttings and tissue culture plants, and also from seed, where we grow the plants in these indoor environments. And you can imagine that our success in rooting some of these plants and getting these little transplants going is very successful in a controlled environment compared with a Florida greenhouse in July. And so that's a case of a very high valued crop with a very short production time. And so the challenge with growing without sunlight is is capital cost, electrical cost, and when you think about the carbon footprint to generate that electricity, it's quite large. So it's really only very specific niche type high valued crops, where local is a very important part of the value of it.
Yes, I guess I shouldn't have said no. I don't know if it's the future of agriculture, but it's just very energetically expensive to produce a food crop indoors compared to just growing it either in a greenhouse or out in the field. And that's why when you're selling a lettuce grown in California versus a lettuce grown in this vertical farms, one is significantly, perhaps 5-6 times more expensive than the other. And another thing that I guess I don't think there's research to back up the statement, but I also believe that a lot of the plants that are grown indoors, let's use the lettuce example, may actually have higher nutritional value than a lot of the things that are grown in this vertical farms or greenhouses, because those plants have been stressed and have been exposed to a lot of stressors that really trigger that accumulation of nutritional compounds that indoor grown plants don't necessarily have, unless people in purpose give those stresses to the plants, which is what they're trying to do these days. It's to increase that quality, just because otherwise the plants wouldn't have much of it.
There's another question here from Lisa about how do you deal with algae? And in my own research program, I do a lot of work with biofilm and water quality and fertilizer, that side of things. And what we know for hydroponics is that any sanitizing agent, the roots in hydroponics are very, very sensitive to them. So I wouldn't try to do any Clorox or any treatment like that to plants that are already growing in a hydroponic system. Basically what you want to do is just clean, and so clean, get rid of all of the dirt, then sanitize with whether it's a hydrogen peroxide based product or a bleach type product, and do that in between the cycles of the crops. And another thing in terms of algae is just avoiding having any sunlight getting down into into your nutrient solution.
Well, cool. I guess it's 12:45, so I guess we'll wrap it up here unless anybody has a real quick question.
Well, thanks a lot, John. It's been fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It really means a lot, like getting, like awesome speakers like at the forefront of this world, research of hydroponics and greenhouse systems. And so, yeah, thank you, Dr. Gomez and Dr. Fisher, for being here. It really means a lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy that sunlight outdoors.
Bye.
So with that, yeah, I guess we'll just go over to the all members meeting here. If anybody has any questions, comments, anything, now is your time to address it. I guess I'll just go ahead and lead off here. Not a lot has changed since last meeting. And I kind of threw out the email yesterday that we are starting to, it's the same deal. If you are not in one of the vulnerable populations, we are open to you potentially coming back here in the end of, well, midway through June, I think is what we're looking at, the timeline currently. Outside of that, there's still the same opportunities, like doing stuff with social media, maybe working on presentations, that type of thing. But I don't know if there's too many items for this week in terms of, other than Tom, I think, has got some of he might have something to say here about the overhead for where we're at with the budget. Are you there, Tom?
I'm here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And
This is the budget update for the Master Gardener account for the year to date through April 30th. And I want to say thank you to Darla Wilkes at the Orange County Extension Office, because typically I would go in and visit with her and get the information, but she's been able to email it to me the last couple of months. Obviously, I can't go down there. As you might expect, in April, there was very little activity. In fact, there were no income transactions and only 2 expenses, $20 payment to Facebook for plant fair advertising, and a very small, less than $1 for prorated overhead to the University of Florida for managing the account. Darla breaks that out each month based on the various extension programs as to what their portion of that is. Overall, so far this year, we've collected $3,469 in income and $3,416 in expenses, which we adjust to a net income of 0 each month by adding that negative $52.60 item in the income, that far right-hand column. What that means basically is that if the end of the year was today, we've added $52.60 to the carryover for the year, which was $34.49.63. You see in the 2020 budget column. We would have added that to the account. Because of the shutdown, there's some expense items that have been budgeted, but that we have not spent. The open house budget for refreshments for that, $150. We're underspending because we're not providing lunch for the lunch and learns to date. And, you know, there's some items that I'm not sure what the status is, for example, of the garden grants, the team building program, which happens in June, the home and garden show volunteers, et cetera. I mean, obviously, we will probably underspend most of the expense items because of that. But that gives you a picture where we are year to date on the budget.
okay, let me stop the share here. All right, I guess I'll just open it up here. Oh, actually, I think Lee, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here.
I think you're probably the next item here, like with regards to our operations, what we can and can't do. So I'll throw it over to you here.
Well, that was my dog who has a statement to do. Okay, no, quiet, really, this is not the time. So, hi, everybody. I just want to say that we are still looking to, shush. I'm sorry, she has dementia, and it's like dealing with anything. She won't listen. So we're looking to have our next plant festival on March 6th of 2021. I've reached out to the different people that were leaders last year, and most people have gotten back to me that they are more than willing to help out again. There's a few areas we'll be looking to ask some new people to come in and assist us if possible. I'm gonna see, I don't know if I can do a video here. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know. Anyway, also we're looking to make some changes based on all the comments we received on the sticky notes and the additional emails that we got. They were terrific, and I've had the time, of course, to go in and document all of those and have those ready. And other than that, John and I have been talking about getting together and maybe having a Zoom meeting with some specific people that would be key to get started on projects for next March. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking to do that. Other than that, if there's any questions, that's where we are. Sorry about my dog.
Thank you, Lee. If anybody got any comments, I guess we'll start moving on that, and we'll work on a couple of timelines for next year's event. But I mean, it's time. We still got to look forward to that like a year ahead of time for certain aspects of it. So, looking forward to working with folks here in some capacity, like as we're kind of in suspension for a lot of other things. So Penny's asking even if you're in the older age group, which means, well, anyone that's in a vulnerable population, can you feel comfortable coming in? Can we reassume regular plant clinic shift? I mean, I'm just going to reiterate what Ed said last week. No, like we can't. So, I mean, we can't have like people here that are part of the vulnerable populations here regularly. It's just in a volunteer capacity. Like, I mean, as much as I would love for people to, to be here and things to go back to normal. I mean, we don't want you, and we don't, assuming that risk, and we don't want to, be part of that. If anything, given that like all that we know about the disease and what, the populations that are vulnerable to it, we don't want that exposure. So with that said, we'll look forward to, the progressive phases here, and, we'll keep monitoring the situation, and hopefully we will be able to go back to that sooner than later, but it's really tough to say right now. So Tanya, what about Sunday in the Garden? Well, it's still technically a volunteer activity, and like that we're being told that any volunteer activity that, I mean, like involves people from these populations, that we can't do that, we can't have participants in like doing that type of stuff. So we can't do that either. I've thought about the logistics for doing something like Sunday in the Garden, but like kind of over Skype or Zoom. So there's still potential for that. I've got a list of like 4 or 5 people that volunteered to potentially do it. So if you are interested, I think I need more than 4 or 5 people here to keep it up weekly. And I just figured it looked like we might get some interest in it, and then it would wane after a few weeks if we weren't, getting more numbers here. It didn't seem like I got a ton of interest in it. So just email me if that's something that you would like to do. When will we be able to work in the garden?
If you're over 65, you can have it at your house.
Exactly. You could be doing it via Zoom at your house, and as long as you've got a decent Wi-Fi connection out to your garden. So,
That's right.
So, Patricia, when will we all go work in the gardens? Again, if you're in the age category that, like that's, and you don't have any other. What's that?
I said that's being discriminated against, not by you, but by the government, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's CDC guidelines. So, I mean, and we're across the board here. There's not a lot of answer. These are very strange times. And I think ultimately, people are just trying to look out for everybody's best interests here. It's not like we're trying to do it to be mean or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, the same goes for the gardens. If you're outside of the vulnerable populations, you can volunteer in the gardens too. And I think I'll try and include more there. I need to talk to Tia about the details there.
Yeah, they're going to let us all wither up at home.
Well, you're getting some good gardening time in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pulling weeds and raking leaves at home.
Hey, John, this is Janie. Are all the counties following the same set of guidelines?
Yeah, these are more or less given to us from Wendy Wilbur. And by proxy, UF the deans from the College of Agriculture, and then by proxy from the governor. So that's where it's all coming from, essentially, because we are this weird partnership between county and state, but and it's technically county property, but even then we're not allowed to operate. They're saying the same thing, like CDC guidelines. So and that's why we can't even, we are opening out the doors here to the public June 1st, and we're having more of the faculty agents coming back. But I mean, it's going to be in a limited capacity. The hours are only 8 to 12, and we don't have all the supplies, PPE, etc., sanitizer to keep up like normal operations the way they were before, and enough space too. So,
Penny, I agree with you. We get more exposure going to the grocery store.
that might be true, but I mean, we're just following our orders, you know how it is. So
Understand. We understand.
I wish I could open the garden up at the very least, but we're just doing what we're being told to do here. So Max says something here. There is a zen to pulling weeds. Okay, so I think with all that, Susan. I think Susan said something here. I'm looking for it. So, okay, I guess there's stuff going on with VMS right now. Typically, what we do is we try and schedule like half a year ahead of time on VMS and get everything straightened out for the next half a year. Because things are so screwed up right now, we can't do that. We're having to plan June and July out right now in accordance with what we think is going to be happening at that point. So, I mean, I think we're looking at a situation here where if we do go back to normal, we'll go ahead and like try and set up the schedule that we had previously. But right now, we've got to be scheduling for the next few months at a time, and that's basically like just having one person in here at a time with me every weekday from 8 to 12. And I think I mentioned in the emails that there's going to be two types of shifts. Either you can be here for the full hours on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or two 2-hour shifts in case you don't want to be here for full hours, like available on Tuesday and Thursday. But that, I mean, as mentioned, it's for the folks that like are outside of the vulnerable population category. So let me see if anything else here. So Tia has been doing some great Facebook videos. Yes, Nancy. If you are interested in doing this type of thing, that's part of like the social media team, and email me. Let me know what your plans are, and then we can even have a Zoom meeting here at some point, plan it out, and maybe set up a schedule or something like that, like for doing Facebook Live videos. They don't need to be long, just 5 minutes at a time, that type of thing. It's something that I really want to get to, and like for it to be a regular thing. But I mean, my biggest thing that, portion of the job that I'm devoted to right now is running the plant clinic. And so it hasn't really given me a lot of time to do more of these other types of media and that type of thing. Let's see here. Yes. So Susan just also said something. Just remember the email about altering the plan. Yeah. So that's just where we're at. We're just gonna have to roll with it on VMS currently. I mean, hopefully we will get to a point that we can revert back to the old schedules, but that's just not where we are right now. Okay. Yeah, we can be doing some videos like Tia's. I see that, Bonnie. Facebook videos by Tia count as CEUs? Well, they're only, I think most of them are only 5 minutes, but like if you attend any of her classes, yeah, it definitely counts. I mean, I don't know if you can accumulate enough of them, her Facebook videos like that, 15 minutes worth of them would be 0.25 hours of volunteer credits. So, I mean, just be fair to yourself and to the program in terms of how you want to stack up your continuing education, and that's fine. Yeah, 15 minutes, 0.25. So, all right, folks. I guess if that wraps up another successful Lunch and Learn and all members meeting. Thank you all for being here. I mean, it means a lot that we have this many people show up for when we do get these awesome experts in from UF willing to share their time with us. And I felt like I learned a lot today. That was some stuff that I really don't, have a ton of background in, and I thought it was pretty neat. So, and I think
those pictures were beautiful.
Yeah, and I know we've got that greenhouse back here, so it kind of gives me some ideas. Like maybe we need to team up with Hannah to do some more stuff here, but that's for down the road. But at any rate, Eventbrite. Yeah, check out Eventbrite for more opportunities as well with IFAS. Other than that, if you got any questions, concerns, etc., you know where to find me. I guess until next week, you guys take care.
Hey, thanks. You're doing a great job, John. Appreciate it.